Thank you everyone for joining us at the APA Voice Candidate Forum for City Council District 19. CD19 encompasses everywhere from College Point, Whitestone, North Flushing to Bayside, Little Neck. This is an incredibly important gathering. CD19, a third of our population here are Asian American, and we need to show our voting power to people who want to run to represent this district. In the last election for CD19 in 2021, the incumbent won her seat only on a margin of 250 votes. That determines who represents you in the most local level office for the next 4 years. We really encourage our community members to show up on June 27th and vote in the June primary election for CD19. And again, don't forget to rank your vote. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Paul Graziano, and I was invited to the APA Forum today. I really appreciate the invitation, and thank you all for having me. I was sorely disappointed that one of my opponents, Tony Avella, not only refused to show up, but refused to fill out the questionnaire. I'm literally shocked about this. It was great to see Chris Bay, my opponent, come here today, and it was great to see all the participants. And I really hope that we will continue to have great conversation and dialogue about the most important issues of the day.
APA Voice, thank you so much for having me today. The work that you do as a broad coalition of different community organizations are integral for our community. I am very excited that both me and Paul Graziano were here today. I'm a little bit disheartened to see that our other opponent, Tony Avella, was not here today. But showing up is the name of the game. Really glad everyone came out today, and thank you so much.
This is the APA Voice Candidate Forum for City Council District 19. APA Voice is a coalition that organizes together on civic outreach, including mobilizing our community to vote in elections. My name is Carlotta Mohammed, and I'm a reporter with the Queens Courier, which is under Schneps Media. And it is an honor for me to moderate today's candidate forum. We are excited to introduce and welcome our candidates here with us today. We are joined by Paul Graziano and Christopher Bay. Thank you for joining us. Unfortunately, Tony Avella and Councilmember Vicky Palladino will not be able to join us for tonight's forum. Please note that we are offering interpretation in Korean, so a reminder for our candidates to speak slowly so our interpreter can follow. First, let's talk about the importance of city council members. There are 51 city council districts that represent 8.8 million New Yorkers. Each city council district represents approximately 175,000 residents. They make laws by introducing and voting on bills that can become laws if signed by the mayor. They also help decide how the city spends its money on everything by negotiating and approving the city's annual budget. In City Council District 19, about 1/3 of residents are Asian American, highlighting the importance of engaging this community. Now, Ming Kwan Center's Han-Ji Lee will provide a refresher on ranked choice voting. Remember, only the ballot for City Council will use this form of voting.
There we go.
Thank you, Carlotta. So before we talk about ranked choice voting, let's first talk about primary and also general election. So for this specific candidate forum is hosted for the primary election, which will take place on June 27th. That is a Tuesday. Poll sites are open from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. So for this specific district, which is District 19, we only have an active primary for the Democratic Party, right? So you'll only be able to vote in this primary if you're a registered Democrat. The last day to register to vote for this primary is June 17 for new voters. The candidates will be appeared on the Democratic primary ballot are Tony Avella, Christopher Bay, and also Paul Graziano. But what happens if you're not a registered Democrat? There is the general election that will take place on November 7th, which is also a Tuesday, poll sites are always open from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. So in the general election, any registered voter could vote in the general election regardless of your party affiliation. The last day to register to vote for this specific election is October 28th for new voters. The candidates will appear on the general election ballot are the winner of the Democratic primary and also the current incumbent Councilmember Palladino. Now let's talk about ranked choice voting. So what is ranked choice voting? So ranked choice voting is a form of voting. So when we implement ranked choice voting, you can rank up to 5 candidates in the order of preference instead of voting just for one. So we have ranked choice voting after the amendment in the city charter was approved by voters in 2019. So the last time we used ranked choice voting is 2021, right? The city local level election. So how does ranked choice voting work, right? So you can rank up to 5 candidates instead of just choosing one. So the first round, we're counting all the first choice votes. So in this round, if any candidate receives more than 50% of votes, then they are the winner automatically. But if that did not happen, then we have to continue the voting, the counting of the votes in rounds. So at the end of each round, the candidate with the fewest votes will be eliminated. So if you rank that candidate as your number 1, your vote will go to the next highest ranked candidate on your ballot. And this process will continue until there are only 2 candidates left, and the candidate with most votes will win. So this is relatively new to our community. So how do we mark our ballot, right? So as you can see here, I have a picture of how to correctly mark your ballot. So fill 1 circle in each row and column. So the rows are for the candidates, and also the column are like your preference, like your first favorite, second favorite, third favorite, and all. So you do not have to rank candidates you do not support. If your ballot is rejected by the scanner, you can always request a new ballot in the language you need. Here are some of the examples of how you should not fill your ranked choice ballot. Right? As you can see, the first one we have, you should never fill in more than 1 oval for 1 candidate. Right? If you rank them as your number 1, you do not need to rank them as your second favorite as well. And then the second one, as you can see here, so you should not give more than 1 candidate the same ranking. So basically, if you rank your candidate as your number 1, and then you're going to rank another candidate as your number 1 again, that is incorrect. And the third image, as you can see here, that you have to fill in your ballot correctly. Otherwise, you will be rejected. So now let's take a look at the time here. It's almost 5, it's almost dinner time. So I'm sure a lot of us are hungry here. So I would like to ask everyone to take out your cell phone, right, and scan the QR code on screen. Let's take some time and scan the QR code on the screen. So this is a quick practice of how to fill your ranked choice voting ballot. Let's take some time. For those of you who cannot see clearly, feel free to come to the front. All right, so 5 more seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, so what does this QR code link us to? Let's take a look at what we have here. Oh, this is a ranked choice ballot for your favorite kimbap. As you can see here, all the candidates, I have spicy tuna, spicy beef, vegetable, squid as your favorite kimbap option. So feel free to play it around, right? As you can see here, you can rank them as your number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5. You do not have to rank all of them, only rank the ones you like. So let's take a look. Let's rank spicy tuna as our First choice, spicy tuna. Yes, spicy tuna is good, right? We like spice. Okay, so for my second choice, let's do tuna. Okay, feeling a lot of seafood here. Okay, and for my third choice, I would say squid. Okay, and my fourth choice would be vegetable. Okay, I do not like beef, so I'm gonna leave my fifth choice blank, and that's totally okay. All right, so let's click vote. Let's see. Oh, okay, spicy beef. So after 5 rounds of ranked choice voting, we have spicy beef as our final winner. Second winner is spicy tuna, and then tuna, squid, and vegetable. So that's how your absentee ballot will look like, and this is how it will work. So make sure you know and remember to use ranked choice voting in this specific election. All right, I'm gonna pass the mic back to Carlota.
Thank you for that lovely presentation on ranked choice voting, Hanji. And now we have Minkwon's Executive Director, John Park, who will say some words.
Thank you all. This is going to be brief. My name is John Park, he/him, Executive Director of the Minkwon Center for Community Action. Thank you all for being here and for your interest in showing up. I also wanted to just briefly address an issue that is important to recognize, and it's the fact that we had a couple candidates and an incumbent who didn't actually show up, and I think it's important to address this. First of all, I want to say that APA Voice is the foremost API civic engagement program coalition in the city, by far. Number 2, 18% of New York City residents are Asian American. That is 1 in 5, and we can say that now, it's close enough. 1 in 5 New Yorkers are Asian American. So when we have a district like District 19, and we have candidates who are saying that they support their community and they're here to hear our needs, and they don't show up to this APA Voice Candidate Forum, I'm not going to point certain things, but it's indicative when they don't come out to hear out the Asian American Candidate Forum, the only one in this district. And I want to point out a second thing that's also equally important, that when candidates do show up, it means a lot. They came out here to see and represent and hear your voices and to field any questions that you might have. So I want to recognize the folks who did come out and give them some applause, not just as candidates, but for showing up to be here to listen to our community. So thank you. Thank you very much. All right, I'll pass it back.
Okay, now we will ask for our candidates to provide their 1 to 2 minutes of opening remarks, starting with Mr. Graziano.
Can everybody hear me? Yes. Great. My name is Paul Graziano. I am born and bred in this district. I've lived here I just turned 52 on Sunday. I am a land use and zoning expert and urban planner who's been deeply, deeply involved in the issues of this community for the last 30 years. I have a 7-year-old who goes to PS 209 in Clearview Gardens. I am a native of North Flushing. I've lived on the same block for my entire life. And one of the things that I'm fighting for is to protect our communities. And what does that mean? That's a fairly broad statement. But what I've done recently, just in the last month and a half, was stop the governor, 2 years in a row actually, last year and this year, from destroying our communities. It's extremely important. She wanted to literally take away our rights as property owners and homeowners in our community. So luckily, on April 20th, she finally capitulated. Other things about protecting our neighborhoods is public safety, something that my competition to my left is extremely well versed in. Public safety, protecting our communities, making sure that our educational achievement and attainment is at its highest levels. Again, I have skin in the game, having a 7-year-old first grader. at PS 209. And also, I think, also important, hearing the voices of all the people of this community. This community is incredibly diverse. It's been diverse even when I was a kid. It was already one of the more diverse communities in New York City. And I think it's extremely important that everybody gets a seat at the table and is able to make their voices heard and have an elected official representing, remember, 170,000 people in this district, that they are able to listen to those folks and hear their wishes and make sure that they can implement them. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Christopher Bay, and I'm running for City Council District 19. So I grew up in this neighborhood, Northeast Queens, and like many in the Asian American community, I was taught that public education, or I was taught education and working hard was the name of the game. And quite frankly, I went to CUNY Law School because I had a passion for public interest. I joined the district attorney's office as a prosecutor, and it was an absolute honor to serve. But at a certain point, I realized that working hard alone wasn't cutting it. I realized when Donald Trump was elected and he was using dangerous and divisive rhetoric that, hey, we actually have to come to the table and be civically engaged, because without that, our voices in our communities are not heard. And looking around the political landscape now, I'm telling you that there is an incumbent in this seat who is very much like that former president, in that she is very divisive, she only caters to her base, and she uses very dangerous rhetoric that can really do a lot of harm in our communities. She's pro-MAGA, etc., etc. So that's why I'm here. I'm here to fight for a fresh and sensible start in our community. I have the experience when it comes to public safety, as I prosecuted serious violent felonies at my time at the DA's office. I continue to serve in leadership positions at the Asian American Bar Association, Korean American Lawyers Association. Albany was at the forefront during the pandemic against anti-Asian hate crimes, advocating for policy changes, legislative changes, for more resources. Calagny partnered with local civic associations to make sure that resources were deployed on the ground to the necessary folks. So here I am asking for your support, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, candidates. Now we'll begin with the issue-based questions. Candidates, please keep in mind that you have 2 minutes each to answer. The first question pertains to budget priority. What will be your budget priority if you are elected as a city council member? How do you plan to use your power to serve our APA community? Mr. Graziano.
Excuse me. So there are a number of budget priorities that are key for District 19. First off, in our district, we have one of the better districts in the city in terms of education. Again, it's a draw for many of those who are looking to have the best education for their children that they can possibly have in the city, in the public schools. Again, I'm a product of the public schools. Chris is a product of public schools. We both went to Bronx High School of Science. In fact, I have my 35th reunion right after this event tonight, which I'm going immediately to. How many people in the audience have gone to Bronx Science? All right, there we go. So, education is a very top priority for me because, again, one of my concerns is that the Department of Education and the concentration of power by the mayor is actually taking away options from our kids. And I see it every day having a kid in first grade in the Gifted and Talented program at PS 209. So it's extremely important that the resources are allocated correctly for this district for education. That's number one. Number two, and again, I'm sure my opponent will be talking about this, public safety. It's extremely important in our district. If you read my response I literally witnessed a hate crime in front of my house a year and a half ago, and the response to it from the police, unfortunately, was not to the level that it should have been. It really should have been categorized as a hate crime. Part of this has to do with the fact that we do not have enough police in this district, and they are not spending time and the right direction. So in terms of dealing with crime in our communities. So these are two of my main priorities in the budget, absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, so with regards to public safety, that is my number one concern. And I do think that public safety goes hand in hand with mental health. You know, I was recently at an event at KCS where I know that organizations such as KCS are really trying to address the issues of mental health, well-being that, you know, quite frankly, if you don't address it and nip it in the bud, it's going to come back to haunt our community in, you know, ways that we don't want it to see it. We've already seen it in the news with regards to folks who are, you know, arguably mentally unwell, are causing trouble on our public transportations, in our streets. And to really get to the root of public safety, we do have to tackle mental health. So I will be, you know, certainly focusing on that. With regards to our public education, you know, that is a top priority for me as well. We are facing, in our communities, you know, we have some of the most overcrowded classrooms. You know, I will certainly make sure that we are striving to make sure that we are on track to hit our metrics and our goals to make sure that our classrooms are reduced in number of students per teacher. That has been mandated by the courts, and I have reservations that we are on track to meet those. Because right now, if we're not investing in our students, if we're not investing in our public education, I truly don't believe that we will be able to solve the bigger picture and bigger issues for crime. Thank you.
Our next question is about the migrant crisis. Our city has experienced a surge with a high number of asylum-seeking families in the past year, mostly residing in temporary migrant shelters. What will you do to help the migrants that currently live in those temporary shelters? How do you see the city's response to asylum seekers? And what goals do you think the city government should be pursuing to address the need? Mr. Graziano.
So the first thing I'd like to mention, and I'm not sure if the folks in this room know this, but our city is sort of unique in the entire country that in our city charter, it's listed that anyone who seeks housing who comes to our city is essentially guaranteed housing. And while I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, it puts us at a very different, let's say from a governmental standpoint, it puts us at a disadvantage to other cities in the country. And what that means is, as you've seen with Mayor Adams, it's going to cost billions and billions of dollars to help those migrants who are coming here. Many of them are coming here for very good reason. There's no question about that. But we are in a situation where we have almost no control from a governmental standpoint, where other cities, such as Chicago or Los Angeles, they just turn people away. Is that the right answer? Not necessarily. But we don't have the ability to negotiate over this unless there is a revisiting of what that means in terms of the city and even the state constitution, which also guarantees housing. So I think in order to humanely and correctly deal with a crisis that, in my opinion, is not going away anytime soon and perhaps not for years, I think we need to put our heads together instead of, you know, our city operates oftentimes on Scotch tape and Elmer's glue. And what that means is if something happens and there's a crisis, people jump in and try to quickly deal with it instead of planning. I'm a planner. This is what I do. I'm an urban planner. I sit here and spend years looking at an area. How can this area incorporate or accommodate people, buildings, etc.? And it's that kind of planning that needs to be thought at from a government perspective. So thank you very much.
So we're certainly at a crossroads right now in the city with regards to a lot of different issues that all kind of come to a head. When you talk about the migrant situation, the lack of beds and the lack of places to put them or to house them, that also goes to the issue of homelessness here in our city. And first, I just want to point out that this administration, as well as the previous administration, have had ample opportunities, unique opportunities during the past few years, the pandemic, with empty buildings and the like, to really address this issue of homelessness, so that even faced with this large influx of migrants that we didn't necessarily expect, we would have the infrastructure to take them on. But ultimately, from a position of compassion, we should be assessing the situation. We should be providing resources. When you drive by Anchor Inn, you see families standing outside, you see kids running around. And at the end of the day, we still need to provide services to these families, children, to get them up to speed on education. Because ultimately, as Paul mentioned, there is no end in sight. So to the best that we can, use our resources now, and as our resources are drying up really quickly, we're going to need national government, we're going to need the Biden administration, we're going to need Mayor Adams to really stand up and continue to fight for our city for more resources, because this isn't an issue that City Council alone can handle. This is a lot larger than what it is right now, and we need the federal government to step up.
Our next question is about the gaming facility. Do you support the proposal to build a gaming facility in Willets Point? How would the proposed casino impact the communities in this district?
I assume I'm going first?
Yes.
Okay, just double checking, thank you. So, some of you know, because you've seen me at your protests with Fed Up Coalition, at the big town hall meeting a few weeks ago. I am the founder of a group called Save Flushing Meadows Corona Park. And 10 years ago, when the then owner of the Mets, the Wilpon family, tried to build a 1 million square foot mall on this same property to the west of Citi Field, I was one of the 27 plaintiffs that sued the city and the state to stop it. This is our public parkland. Everybody needs to understand that. It looks like a parking lot. It is not. It is public parkland. This casino is, I am 100% opposed to it for multiple reasons. One, it is a giveaway of 65 acres of our parkland to the 95th richest person in the world. The property is worth $750 million. The bill that was proposed by Assemblyman Aubrey calls for $20 million of capital improvements on 20 acres of parkland as a swap for $750 million. And this gaming facility will make Steve Cohen, or as his friends call him, Uncle Steve, which I find offensive, $500 million a year on the misery of our communities. This is unacceptable. I have fought this before. I will continue to fight, and I am in utter solidarity with those who are in the audience opposed to this, and we will stop this. Thank you.
And before I jump into my answer, I'd be remiss not to acknowledge all the work that Paul has done, in terms of zoning issues and land use issues. I was at one of his press conferences earlier this year when he did, in fact, mobilize a large group of different folks in opposition to Governor Hochul's plans in the budget. So thank you, Paul, for all your hard work. So I take the position that the casino is not right for our community here in Willets Point. I commend State Senator Jessica Ramos for having a steady hand in all of this and not rushing to do one thing or another when some of the richest people and the most powerful people on this side of town are really pushing and lobbying, and we're lobbying to get a casino right there in the heart of our community. Because at the end of the day, we are asking for an investment in our community, not for a money grab. And I think this is where a little bit, Paul and I divert a little bit in our paths, In that ultimately, yes, it is parkland, and that's true. But if we can bring more jobs, more investments, and investment in our infrastructure, and some of these things that that area could really use. And right now, we talked about the homelessness issue and the housing crisis. It's a supply and demand thing. So we're not here to line the pockets of the billionaires, but if we can, sensibly, explore ideas and ways in which we can use some open spaces, some spaces to really help with the supply and demand issue of housing, then I would be open to it. But we're not talking about that right now. We're talking about a casino. We're talking about what I would argue is a vice that would take from our communities and not really invest in it, and therefore I object.
Question number 4, Our City, Our Vote. In 2021, New York City Council passed Our City, Our Vote, Local Law 11, which expanded municipal voting rights to legal permanent residents and those with work authorizations. This opened the door for over 800,000 New Yorkers to make their voice heard in their city. Since then, OCOV, which is Our City, Our Vote, was struck down by a Staten Island judge. If the courts ultimately decide that OCOV does become law, how would you conduct outreach to immigrants in your district to make sure they know their rights? And conversely, if the courts decide that non-citizens don't have the right to vote, what follow-up steps would you take to ensure their voices are heard? Mr. Graziano.
So the first thing I want to say is that I'm married to an immigrant. My wife came from Poland 30 years ago, and my mother-in-law is still a green card, and my brother-in-law is a green card. They live in Forest Hills and Woodhaven. They cannot vote, and they've been here for 30 plus years. So that's the first thing I'm going to say. Second thing I'm going to say is, I think the main reason that the judge who struck it down, is because based on the state constitution, it is illegal. So the only way that this will change is through a constitutional convention or a change to the state constitution, which is not an impossible thing, but it's not easy. So the first thing I'll say is, my current stand, and I've stated it in my position here, is that I believe that citizenship is something that garners the ability to vote. It is very important. It's a deeply, deeply held belief of my own. My wife became a citizen, and my mother-in-law and my brother-in-law chose not to become citizens. They had the choice, and they chose not to. So they should not vote if they choose not to become a citizen. Now, should people who have green cards have fast track to become citizenship? Absolutely, no problem with that. If they want to become citizens, yes, then they should be able to vote. So that is my statement on that. In terms of, as I said before, my opening, my goal is to give the voice to every person in my district, and even beyond if necessary. There are 170,000 people in this district, and I am happy to speak to every single one of those folks who live in this district. And many of those people don't vote, are not registered to vote even if they are citizens or cannot vote. So my goal here is to represent everybody. Thank you.
Immigrants really make up the fabric of our communities. I had the pleasure of meeting Paul's wife. She was an absolute sweetheart. But at the end of the day, if you're paying your taxes, you should have a right to vote. And we're talking about folks plugged into the community, offering essential services and doing the work that really keep our local economies going. And if that's the case, they have to have a say in who they're being represented by. They have to say how their tax dollars are working for them. And Staten Island, lawyers definitely know that it's a very conservative court system over there. So perhaps some forum shopping was going on here. And maybe or maybe not, Paul could be right in terms of the constitutional interpretations. But trust me, there's a lot of really smart lawyers working on this, a lot of community activists working on this, and I fully support them in their fight. To the extent that there are incredible organizations out there like the Minkwans, or everyone part of this coalition here in APA Voice, I'm not here to recreate the wheel. I'm here to support you with a platform, to amplify your message, and hopefully with the resources that I'll be able to provide as your next council member. I'm here to support, and I'm here to make sure that everyone knows that if you pay your taxes, you should have your right to vote.
Okay, for the next 5 questions, I will begin with Mr. Bay. Question number 5, shelters and housing insecurity. In late May, a town hall was held by the incumbent on the opening of a 75-bed transitional facility in Douglaston for senior women ages 55 years and older. That is expected to open in late August. It is operated by Samaritan Daytop Village. The community was split on its support for this facility. There is a network of privately operated shelters, mainly operated by faith leaders, to provide shelter for housing vulnerable residents in this district. If elected to council, how would you utilize the power of the office to protect housing vulnerable residents? Mr. Bay.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So I think, again, it goes back to starting from a place of compassion, just making sure you understand that the folks who are in these situations ideally don't want to be in the situations that they're in. I believe that using resources to make sure that they can get back onto their feet are critical, because at the end of the day, we want to make sure that this is a temporary situation, that they get some sort of job trainings, they have access to different types of resources so that they can really get back on their feet. Also, I would be in support of, getting rental vouchers, in the sense that, yes, we have set up these homeless stations for folks to really get back on their feet or to be housed for a while. But again, it really goes back to the supply and demand issue all across the city that's now taking shape in homeless places coming into our district. If we're not going to tackle the bigger issue of our housing situation, we're going to continue to see more of this. And now I'm not saying that that's necessarily a bad thing, but I'm just saying we have to have a bigger picture understanding of why we're here and what we can do to solve the bigger issues of not having enough housing.
So I have a little history with this site, which is that the Douglaston Civic Association, which represents this area, hired me as an expert to fight this shelter, and for very good reason. The city is violating its own laws to build this shelter. This shelter should not be at this location because there is a variance on this property that does not allow for there to be a shelter on this site. That being said, the bigger question here is this site correct for a homeless shelter? It is not near major transportation. It is not near social services where those who need that help, those who are most vulnerable, who will be here, they're not going to have access to this. I think the biggest concern that came out of the town hall meeting, and I think this is, as again with Chris with public safety, one of the biggest issues that came out of this, since I know exactly what happened, was that when the Department of Homeless Services and Samaritan Village were asked, will the women who are going to be at this site be checked for criminal records and violent criminal records, violent felonies, they were told no. So while compassion is important, safety for our community is, to me, the priority, because this shelter, everybody is going to say, well, we really need to help these folks, and I agree with that. But for those of you who don't know, this is also right next door to a school. This is right in the middle of a residential community. And if something goes wrong, and if people get hurt, there's going to be a lot of hand-wringing. So if there's going to be an active shelter there, I think DHS has to change their policy to make sure that violent felons are not going to be housed at this location. Thank you.
Question 6, anti-Asian hate. As an elected, how would you address the rising wave of anti-Asian hate crimes in our community? What kind of community-driven public safety solutions do you propose to keep our communities safe? Mr. Bay.
So I think at this point, we've gotten to a dangerous place in our local communities where elected officials are often talking past each other, and it's gotten to a point where who speaks louder, who can rile up their base more, and that's really dangerous when it comes to different issues, but especially, anti-Asian hate crimes. I just want to point out that we do have previously, so never mind, I won't go there. Tony's not here, and I'm not going to take shots at someone who's not sitting next to me. So we'll come back to that. Right. But when practically speaking, in terms of the anti-Asian hate crimes task force for NYPD, you have to understand that for other squads, other detective squads and specialized bureaus within NYPD, they're fully staffed with full-time detectives and police officers who make it their job to become experts at these things. But why is it that the NYPD currently does not have that for Asian hate crimes? There's a certain level of cultural competency that is required when dealing with these sensitive situations. DA's offices certainly have their own units and bureaus for that. Why not the NYPD? And I think this goes to, hey, NYPD, instead of defunding, we should be continuing to give resources to them so that they can continue to staff and not just be based on volunteer hours after a police officer finishes their shift, because that's essentially what happens for the specialized unit of Asian hate crimes. Yeah.
So you may have read what I wrote with the answer of question 4 in the questionnaire. A year and a half ago, a 60-year-old Chinese-American man was walking down the street with his dinner in a plastic bag and was jumped by 5 kids between the ages of 16 and 18 right in front of my house. This was witnessed by a passing Verizon van. He saw the entire thing, and I came out right after it happened. And I called 911, and I actually spoke to the Verizon driver, and I kept him there at the site, at the scene of the crime, while they were cleaning up the teeth of the gentleman who had been beaten to within an inch of his life in front of my house. And the police who showed up refused to report this as a hate crime. And I won't say what the youths said to this gentleman who confronted them. He actually confronted them and said, "Why did you do this? Why would you do this?" before they ran away. And they said something that I really can't repeat. But my point is, all of this was told to the police, the 109th Precinct, who showed up, and they refused to file this as a hate crime, quote, because they didn't want to do the paperwork. That is the wrong answer. So one of the things as a council person that we really have only 3 big powers: land use, budget, and oversight. Oversight's very important, and it's not used enough by the council. I'm a big supporter of the police. As I said, I think we need more police, but we have to make sure that just like every other agency, our police and our public safety workers are doing the right thing for all of us. Thank you.
Question 7, immigrants and economic empowerment. The post-high school employment outcomes of Asian American young adults with disabilities are significantly poorer compared to other ethnic groups of young adults with disabilities. How would you increase and promote local work opportunities for people with diverse backgrounds, skills, and abilities within our community? Mr. Bay.
Well, I have to say, I've never really given
that a thought in the sense that I didn't know that statistic, that folks in the Asian American community. Can you just repeat that statistic one more time?
Okay, so I will reread it again. The post-high school employment outcomes of Asian American young adults with disabilities are significantly poorer compared to other ethnic groups of young adults with disabilities.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, at the very core, we have to invest in our students now, but in terms of people with learning disabilities or any other sort of disabilities, Mom works with special needs children as a paraprofessional, and just seeing the kind of work that she does, I think we need to be empowering more folks like her, trained professionals working with these type of students, so that when they do come out and they are ready to, be marketed in the job force, in the workforce, they do have the essential qualifications, skills, and experience necessary to be marketable in the workplace. And we obviously will not be allowing and tolerating any sort of discrimination, which is against the law. But to really put these kids or put these students and young adults in situations to actually succeed, that's really going to start with investing in our students, in our special needs programs. And I recently learned that there is no gifted and talented program for folks on the spectrum or special needs students here on this side of town. And that would be one program and one step in the right direction, I believe, to really empower and give these folks the opportunities to really succeed.
So, my family, I come from a family of educators. Both of my parents taught in the city university system for almost 60 years combined. My sister's an educator. Obviously, education, as I said, is a big issue for me. Now, my son is in the Gifted and Talented program at PS 209. It's the only class in the whole school. And one of the things that in previous discussions with other debates and forums we've had is how would you help all kids? And obviously, this particular subset of kids is, again, it's a statistic I've never heard either. That was very interesting. We need more gifted and talented programs. We need more specialized high schools. We need programs that are more tailored to our kids and to give them the best possible outcomes in life. One of the things that I've said is, everybody looks at education as this program. It's not a thing. It's a thing to prepare yourself for the rest of your life, to get a job, to raise a family, to have income, to buy something if you can, or have a good life going forward. So that goes for all people. It doesn't just go for, those who are able or those who have advantages. So I think that's a very specific thing that, again, as a council person, that's where in the budget process we have the ability to allocate more funds for these kinds of things, and we can actually write legislation to enable more of that to happen throughout the city. Thank you.
Question 8, policy experience. Please cite one example when you successfully advocated for legislative policy change. Mr. Bay.
Well, the short answer is I don't have that. To the extent that I worked for an elected official as a prosecutor at the Queens DA's office, first under Dick Brown and next under Melinda Katz, I ultimately wasn't allowed to essentially do a lot of different things. There was a lot of red tape. But to the extent that, again, I mentioned it in my opening, so I won't, really dive into it. To the extent that I, supported organizations and partnered with organizations through professional organizations like the Asian American Bar to promote anti-Asian hate legislation and policy changes, that is one thing that I am proud of. And I guess I was allowed to use my individual capacity platform to just raise money for initiatives like this. But from a legal and law standpoint, no, I did not do any of that.
So I have been writing and having my policies adopted for the last 20 plus years. I have numerous, it is, but I do have 15 years on you, so it's okay. You can catch up, it's no problem. So I've had many, many land use laws that I've passed, not just here, but throughout the tri-state area, because I've worked in over 50 municipalities around the tri-state area, Connecticut, New Jersey, New York. One of my biggest victories was to rezone our communities here to protect our 1 and 2 family homes in particular in Northeast Queens and Southeast Queens and Central Queens. Obviously, I had a huge policy victory against the governor over the last 2 years, and a third year prior to that against Corey Johnson, who was the Speaker of the City Council at the time, when he tried to do a similar thing to destroy our communities. Another big policy victory that I had, actually one of my proudest, was saving Fort Totten. Fort Totten was going to be sold off to developers and St. John's University. I was going to become a gated community with 20-story apartment buildings, and I managed to, along with half a dozen other people, stop that. Not alone, but I was deeply involved in the process, and now it's a park in a historic district. How many of you go to Fort Totten on a regular basis? Anybody? Yeah. I'm very proud of that. I can continue on. I have, actually, if you go to my website and you look me up, you'll see 20 plus years of policy throughout the city of New York, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Question 9, accountability. How will you remain accountable to your constituents if elected or re-elected to be the next member to represent City Council District 19? Mr. Bay.
Well, first and foremost, I'll show up to important meetings like this when I'm invited. I'll answer these. I'll answer the questionnaires, and I'll be upfront about what I agree or disagree with specific organizations. But I'll show up, and I think that's one thing that folks have always told me was a good thing about me. That I was always I always said showing up is half the battle, and so I promise you that much. And also at the end of the day, I think in terms of our community making moves in the right direction with finally charges being brought against George Santos, which covers our district. We are fighting for democracy. We are fighting to make sure that our elected officials are accountable to us, the constituents. And although we are taking steps in the right direction, we're not there yet. I think we have to lead by example, and it's unfortunate that Vicky or Tony are not here, but I promise to continue that fight.
So I've been an activist and advocate for 30 years now. I have represented, either as a volunteer or as a consultant, basically every single civic and homeowner organization in this district for decades. I am here, and like Chris said, I'm always here. Anytime anybody has a problem, I'm the first person they call. And I mean that. And in fact, when Tony was running for city council in 2021, I started receiving phone calls from people, and I would say, well, how'd you get my number? I'm happy to help you, but how'd you get my number? Well, Tony Avella said that he can only help me if he gets elected. And that's where he lost me as a supporter, because I used to be a big supporter of his. That's unacceptable. So I am here. I will be here, and if I lose the election, I'll still be here, because that's the way that I roll. So I'm very accessible. Many, many, many people, probably people I don't even know, have my phone number. My wife yells at me for picking up the phone at midnight. Who is that person calling you, and why are they bothering you? And the reason is usually very important. It's because there's a crisis happening, and there's a lot of crises happening in our district and across the city. And I care about them, and I want to do something to help. Maybe I'm the son of a social worker, as I like to say. My mother was a social worker. It's very, very important to do this. What I've seen with our current council person, who I actually know, she's actually responded to people, however, not necessarily the way they want her to respond, but she can respond to that herself if she shows up to another forum. And unfortunately, Tony Avella, who also did not even bother to respond to your questionnaire, which I find shocking, actually. It's a shame he's not here to. It's a shame he's not here to defend himself from me attacking him. But I would be saying the same thing. That's the other thing, and Chris can say this. I'm a very honest and straightforward person. Everything I've even said to Chris, we've had a number of conversations. It's everything. I'm the same person that you see right here. Thank you.
Thank you, candidates. That concludes our issue-based question segment. We will now introduce our lightning round section. So we will ask our candidates a question and they must answer with one word or sentence answers. Are you ready?
Well, wait. One sentence or one word?
You must answer with one word or sentence answers. Okay, so I will begin with Mr. Graziano. Favorite restaurant in the district?
Press 195.
산수갑산 2.
How many doors have you knocked to date?
I can't be Chris, but I've knocked about 800 doors.
No way, you've definitely knocked more than that.
Well, my campaign's knocked more than that. I'm talking about myself personally. We've knocked over 10,000 doors, but I've knocked 800 doors.
Okay, I think I'm a little bit more than 800. We'll just keep it at that.
He's been everywhere. I'll give him that.
Is your campaign website available in multiple languages that reflect the district's demographics? If yes, please list the languages on the site.
English, sorry. Only in English.
Yes, no. So the answer is no, like Paul, and that's my bad. So I'll get on that. Yeah.
This is a ranked choice voting election where voters can rank their candidates in order of preference. We have 3 candidates on the Democratic ballot this June. Who would you ask voters to rank as their second and or third choice?
Do you want to answer this together?
Yeah, by all means, go ahead.
So I would rank Chris second, absolutely.
Yeah, I've told Paul this before. I respect him, and I would rank Paul number 2.
What grade would you give Mayor Adams on the migrant crisis? Grade A through F.
That's a tough one. A C minus or a D, but I can't say a D. C minus.
What's failing again? Is C minus failing?
Barely passing.
Oh, okay. So anywhere around there, just barely passing. But honestly, anyone in that situation would be between a rock and a hard
It's tough.
place.
It's not all his fault.
Name one individual or event that inspired your decision to run for office at this moment.
My kid.
Vicky Palladino.
Since the launch of your campaign, how many shelters have you visited? If yes, please list which ones.
The Douglaston Shelter.
I stopped by the Anchor Inn just to say hi to some folks who were standing outside that I referenced earlier. So just one.
Will you publicly denounce white supremacy and hate against marginalized communities, including LGBTQ allies, especially when it directly impacts District 19 residents?
Absolutely.
Yes.
The council has 38 standing committees that practice oversight of New York City functions, including human services, infrastructure, and government affairs. Each council member is assigned to and serves on at least 3 of our standing committees or subcommittees. Please name 3 subcommittees you would like to serve on.
Well, I want to serve as the chair of the Land Use Committee, Zoning Committee, Education Committee, Finance Committee.
I honestly hadn't thought of it that far, but I do know that the Mental Health Committee does some really good work, and unfortunately, Vicky Palladino was kicked off of it, and so I want to represent in that committee.
Favorite place to relax and unwind in the district?
Fort Totten.
Well, the newly opened Bound Park is good too. Reopened.
And I live right there, so I go there too.
Okay, now we'll ask some audience questions on index cards, and candidates, you will provide a 1-minute response. I will select 5. First question. Are you planning on having more strict policies on public safety? Mr. Graziano?
Yes, I kind of alluded to that by saying that I support increased funding for public safety. I also support the splitting of the 109th precinct into 2 precincts because I don't think the 109th precinct actually is doing their job because they're overstretched. The 109th is now one of the largest precincts geographically, and to get, for example, to get from the precinct to Bay Terrace or to College Point or to Whitestone, it's the response time is not the best. So we need more officers. We need better trained officers, and we also need a split in the precincts.
Yeah, stricter isn't necessarily how I would describe it, but I do think some sensible modifications are certainly necessary, and I acknowledge that can't be done statutorily at the city council level, but I am sitting down with any elected official who'll sit with me, and I'll explain to them why I believe our current bail and discovery laws or the reform went a little bit too far a few years ago. Because at the end of the day, I have colleagues at both NYPD and the DA's offices who are just having a really hard time holding folks accountable. And to that end, I will continue to fight to make sure that our elected officials know that we do need to make some sensible modifications to our laws.
Do you think drag queens are a danger to our children?
I do not think that drag queens are a danger to our children. However, I also don't necessarily believe that drag queens should be in schools. I believe that Drag Queen Story Hour, which I'm not opposed to, should be at the Queens Public Library. That is the best place for that program to be. I, again, go to a school in Clearview. I don't go to a school. My child goes to a school at Clearview Gardens where his class, just to let you know, is actually 85% Chinese American. And I have spoken to every single parent in that class. They are uncomfortable with this. I've spoken to other parents in other classes. I know quite a few kids in his grade. It's one thing to opt into it. It's another thing trying to opt out. So that's my position. I have no problem with there being allocation to a private nonprofit, which the Queensborough Public Library is actually a private corporation. It is not public. So it's okay for that, but to have it in the school, I think, is a bit much. Thank you.
Yeah, drag in and of itself, drag is not dangerous. Drag queens are not dangerous. I do think that we have to listen to the input of all our parents, especially as a 35-year-old who's never been married or never had children. I can't really speak to, how my non-existent children should be taught in public schools. To that end, I do think parents should have a say. But, ultimately, I certainly don't have an issue with Drag Queen Story Hour. I do think a lot has been made over nothing in that it's never been in CD19. It was never really used with school resources, and it was used at public libraries, and folks had the option to not send their kids. So it was used. I talked about divisive tactics earlier, but I think that was certainly one that was used by our current incumbent.
What do you think about standardized testing?
Oh boy. Well, again, having a child who's going to be having standardized testing in a few years, standardized testing has a role in education. There's no question about it. The question is how it's implemented and how it's analyzed, and what the role is at the end of the day for kids, right? Because again, remember, as I said before, this is not about education, it's about the future of our kids and what they're going to be doing when they're adults in their lives. So it's interesting because I've compared the educational system of the city to other states and even to other countries. And we have a system in the United States that's not quite the same as a lot of other countries. So there's a lot more ability for our kids to move between levels than other kids do in other countries. So I think we need to make sure that that ability remains, but I also think that we have to make sure that the standards of the testing, and I think, we talk about standardized, the standards of the testing actually set up the ability for our kids to do well as they become adults. So that's the most important part of it.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. In that, there needs to be a balance between teaching students to test well for the standardized test versus teaching students to set them up for success. And I think there's a middle ground somewhere there where the standard we could revisit or look at the standardized testing as a whole and see, hey, is it really serving our students in terms of setting them up for success? I know firsthand from my teacher friends, come standardized testing time, they're very stressed. They want to make sure that their kids are in a position to do well on the test, and they know that they can be judged one way or another if their students don't. But at the end of the day, we do need some sort of standardized testing, but just make sure that it is a good barometer of where their students actually are.
What are your plans about bike lanes? Our communities have more space than Manhattan, yet less bike lanes.
So I want to preface this by saying I am a biker. I'm someone who, until fairly recently, used to bike, certainly in warmer weather, between 50 and 100 miles a week. And yet, I am not thrilled with the way that the Department of Transportation has implemented bike lanes around the city. Unfortunately, there is a group some of you may be familiar with called Transportation Alternatives. Transportation Alternatives is now acting as a wing of the Department of Transportation. They are actually sitting in on almost every meeting. This is a private organization. They should not be sitting at the table when community boards and when community leaders are sitting with the Department of Transportation. It's just wrong. This is not right. This started under de Blasio and it has continued under Mayor Adams. This is not okay. And as a council person, I will not meet with the DOT unless I'm meeting with the DOT, not the DOT and Transportation Alternatives. That's the first thing I'll say. Second thing I'll say is Community Board 11 has done an excellent job overall, particularly recently, in terms of implementing new bike lanes. The city came forward with a proposal and they came back at them with evidence. I'm an evidence-based kind of guy, right? Because I'm an urban planner. So they came out and said, this is not a good location for your proposal. This is a good one. This isn't good. This is good. This isn't a good one. I am all about that. The one on Northern Boulevard between Douglaston and Bayside, that is a danger. That lane should have never been put in. It is extremely dangerous. So that is something, and I would actually put that into the park where it belongs as a continuation of what's called Joe Michael's Mile from Fort Totten all the way down to Northern Boulevard. So these are the kinds of things, again, as a planner, I think about this all the time. Transportation planning is something that I've done quite a bit of. It's really important that a bunch of people don't just sit here and draw lines on a piece of paper without understanding what they're proposing to do. I hope that answers your question.
So at this point, I'm not really sure what comes first, the chicken or the egg. Are we creating bike lanes because there's a large enough demand of bikers in our district? Or are we creating bike lanes to try to promote more people to take the bike? And I think we have to really get to the bottom of that question before we can really try to assess and see what's exactly going on. I have biker friends. I guess, Paul, unlike you, I'm not a biker. But they tell me, look, even when I see a bike lane, I can't trust that drivers will follow the rules when it comes to it. And therefore, I don't necessarily follow the bike lane rules. And when I hear that, first thing in my mind is like, well, everyone should follow the rules. Yeah, but at the same time, if they feel like, hey, my life is in danger and therefore I will preemptively not follow the rules, and I'm like, all right, so then where are we right now? Like, are the bike lanes really working? And so, that's just an anecdotal thing, and I do want to talk to the experts and see where we are in terms of statistics and ridership, but we certainly have to look into that.
We could have a 30-minute discussion just on bike lanes, by the way. Guaranteed.
How do you plan to combat the rising costs of living in your district?
So one of the things that's of great concern in this district, and across the city as well, is a law that was passed in 2018 called Local Law 97. Some of you may know what this is. It was touted as the way that we were going to take care of climate change in our city. Climate change is a real issue. It's something we have to deal with, and it's something that's very concerning. The problem is that the most affordable housing in our district, co-ops and condos, middle-income co-ops and condos, was supposed to be carved out of this law. And this law, by the way, forces large buildings over 25,000 square feet, which is a huge building, to retrofit all of their HVAC, that's called heating, ventilation, air conditioning, HVAC systems, right? Their boilers, their gas boilers, their oil burners, whatever they have, and retrofit them to take away the climate changing gases that are being generated. The problem is, if you've got a building in the city that's worth $1 billion, and you have middle-income co-ops in Bay Terrace or on Douglaston Parkway or in Clearview Gardens where the units are worth $200,000 apiece, and it costs $25 million, $35 million, $50 million to do this, which is what the costs are. And even after you retrofit, you're still fined by the city because it is impossible for you to attain the goals that were written in the law. This is a recipe for disaster that will bankrupt the co-ops and condos. And again, this is by far the most affordable units we have in our district, and it's about 20% of our district that has the ability for small, young families, seniors, etc., to buy reasonably priced apartments. So this would be an utter disaster for our community. I am 100% opposed to the current situation that's going on, and I support a carve-out provision for middle-income co-ops and condominiums to protect their status as affordable housing, de facto affordable housing in our district. Thank you.
In the interest of time, and quite frankly, I'm not as eloquent as Paul, so I concur with everything he just said about Local Law 97. But additionally, I just really want to go back to this idea of supply and demand. And whether or not we like it, trust me, change is certainly coming. And I don't say that in like the biggest sense of these huge apartment complexes or change the integrity of our neighborhoods. But every once in a while, there will be an opportunity that says, hey, a developer comes and says, I want to make something here. I'm willing to give you X amount of affordable housing, X number of public parking spots. And trust me, this has happened even in Douglaston on Northern Boulevard. What is that? Little Neck Parkway. Douglaston Parkway. There's a building that's coming up, and that person came to the table and said, "Hey, folks, I want to work with the community. I want to have your community input. Tell me what you guys kind of want from this, and we'll give you some of that." But no compromises were made. Folks fought tooth and nail, and at the end of the day, the building still went up. So in that sense, I really do think we need to sensibly come to the table, have productive conversations about building more housing, which will then really help with our supply and demand issues.
I just need to clarify something that Chris said, actually. Those buildings on Douglaston Parkway and that rezoning that happened, I was involved in fighting that directly. There was a big lawsuit that happened, and we had an agreement for a certain number of units on those properties from the community. The developer, who had ties to the previous council member, came in with a rezoning plan to build those big buildings on Douglaston Parkway. The community board had a hearing. 450 people turned out to it. I've never seen anything like it. The developers walked out of the room before they even showed their presentation. The council member, this was Councilmember Vallone, the former council member, refused to speak to the public, and he gave them a rezoning to build those buildings, and they're supposed to be affordable housing for seniors. I don't know if you've passed by, but they have signs up on the building that says luxury apartments for sale. So I want to make this clear, as a council person, as an urban planner, as someone who's been fighting for this community, there are opportunities to rezone areas, but I will never work against our community to do that. Thank you.
Just as a quick clarification, I mean, Paul, you and I can agree to disagree. Again, I truly respect you. But my point is that building came in. And at the end of the day, you know, X number of units could have been affordable housing, and X number of parking spots could have been for the public. But now they're not, because we were too busy fighting to keep them out completely, lose the fight, and now we end up with nothing. I'm just saying, you know, perhaps we need to change our approach and come up with a compromise.
Candidates, thank you for answering the questions. We are coming near the end of the forum. I will now ask you to please issue your closing remarks. 1 minute.
So like you know, my name is Christopher Bay, and I grew up right here in the Bayside area. This is my community, and I'm really happy with the engagement at the doors and speaking with folks. But at the end of the day, you know, a lot of work still needs to be done. I mentioned it before in terms of divisiveness and elected officials who are pitting each other, pitting us against each other. I will not stand for it. You know, over my full legal career as a prosecutor, you know, I advocated for crime victims every single day. I promised to continue to fight for the members of this community. But also, you know, at the end of the day, I did have to learn to navigate the court system. I did have to learn to work with judges, defense attorneys, and do what's really best for the system at large. And I know I can do that for all the constituents in CD19, for all the different communities and the diverse communities of CD19. So I'm really asking for your support, and a vote for Christopher Bay would be a vote for the future. Thank you.
So here's what I'll say. I've spent the last 30 years fighting for my community, period. All the people in this community, every single community in Northeast Queens. My slogan is, it's all about our homes. If our neighborhoods get ruined, the rest doesn't matter. Our own government, at times, is working against the interests of the people who live in this community. First, the Speaker of the City Council did this in 2021, and then the governor tried to take away our own rights last year and this year and violate the state constitution. I fought for my community just like I have for the last 30 years. And when I say my community, I mean everybody sitting in this room, everybody living in our community together. It's an existential threat that we need to bond and work together to make sure we have a good outcome moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Graziano, Mr. Bay, for joining us here tonight. Thank you to our co-sponsors and our audience members for joining us. This is a very important primary election, and the winner this June will go on to compete in the general election this November. Every vote is valuable in determining who our next representative is for the next 4 years. Local elections are decided on the margins, and this district is no different. The coalition has provided candidate surveys, so please take a copy home and share with your friends and neighbors. Make a plan to vote. Remember, early voting begins on June 17th through the 25th, and Election Day is on June 27th. Ask our organizers if you have any questions about ranked choice voting, locating poll sites, or registering to vote. We hope your time tonight with the candidates will help you make an informed decision for this upcoming primary election. Thank you, everyone, and have a good night.
And let's just get a quick round of applause for our incredible moderator, Collada.